I guess, other side. Wait, which side is it? There we go. That is not Jeremy Scott. That is our special guest today, Aaron Reike. What is up, Aaron?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so I'm sure some of you are wondering, Jeremy loves fantasy football. Why is Jeremy not here? Well, pretty big week for Jeremy. You know, he just had a kid yesterday. So big congratulations to Jeremy. Obviously, got much more important things to do than talk with me about fantasy football for the next half hour. But we definitely want to say congratulations to Jeremy, baby boy, nice and healthy, Solomon Jeremiah. So that's great news, isn't it, Aaron?
Yeah, very exciting. I'll have to get advice from him. I have one on the way coming too. So, yeah, it's an exciting time. I'm excited for him.
All right, well, we don't want to spend too much time on that. Jeremy will be back here next week. But before we get going this week, want to definitely make sure and say thank you to our producer, Brad. He controls everything, makes this whole show possible. So big thank you to Brad. But let's get going with the show, Aaron. For those of you first-time viewers, the way this works, we're going to be here about 30, 45 minutes. We're going to talk up front. We're going to talk about a couple of injuries that happened this week. We're going to dive into the picks that Jeremy and I made last week, and then we're going to give you some new picks for this week. So let's start with some injuries. I guess the biggest one to me would be Kelvin Benjamin. Apparently avoids structural damage. Still doesn't look like he's going to play this week. Probably going to miss a couple of weeks, actually. And the Carolina offense was already struggling. So that's a big, big blow to Cam Newton.
Yeah, it's interesting because, they weren't doing well in that offense without him. So I don't even know if you were a Kelvin Benjamin owner, if you were going to start him even if he was healthy. I mean, he was doing very little, and he wasn't reliable with Cam Newton. I think just the uncertainty of you don't know when it is, that's the biggest issue. But we'll see. I mean, it'll be interesting to see when some more information comes out.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I am a Kelvin Benjamin owner. For those of you who watch the show week to week, Aaron's actually a member of the league that Jeremy and I always talk about. He is a proud member of the boys, has been for several years now, actually.
That's right.
So I unfortunately took Kelvin Benjamin in the 4th round of our draft this year, and that has not exactly worked out according to plan thus far. However, Benjamin was not the only player that was injured. One of my picks for last week, actually, Darren Sproles had an insane injury. It actually didn't even look that bad, but he managed to both tear his ACL and break his arm on the same play. And with his age and past injuries, it might not only be the end of the season for Darren Sproles, it might unfortunately be the end of his career.
I mean, I literally don't know how you break your arm and your ACL in the same play. How does that even happen? I don't know. I'm interested to see. There's kind of a logjam in Philadelphia running back, so I'm wondering if this gives a chance for someone else to kind of get a heavier workload. Two of the injuries that I thought were kind of interesting were Michael Crabtree and Melvin Gordon. For Crabtree, I'm wondering, is he even going to play this week? It seemed like he could be out a couple weeks, but he seemed like he missed a significant injury based on what I was seeing. And then for Melvin Gordon, he's someone that I'm wondering as the season rolls on, he gets so many carries in that offense, and they just want to feed him. So I'm wondering, I'm interested in what you think, Trent. Do you think they would consider limiting his workload a little bit? And then that's a lot of the value of Melvin Gordon.
Absolutely. And the problem is the Chargers don't have that great of an offense to begin with. So you take away one of the best weapons that Phillip Rivers has to rely on, and things could get real ugly. And that whole LA Chargers situation is not going great to begin with. They're playing in a 27,000-seat soccer stadium, and they can't even sell that out. And there's already reports that some NFL owners are pushing to force the team to relocate back to San Diego. So that whole thing is just a big mess with the Los Angeles Chargers, and it still feels weird to say that.
Yeah, I can barely keep track of where all the teams are going these days. You've got teams going to LA, teams going to Vegas. I don't know when it's happening, but it's hard to keep track with all the relocation.
All right. Was there anything else we wanted to talk about, Aaron? Anything else that jumps out at you before we go through last week's picks?
Just a small injury. I mean, Matt Forte was injured. I think he was one of Jeremy's picks last week.
He was.
It could be interesting to see, does this mean Bilal Powell can actually get a little bit more time? And maybe if he gets a couple weeks as being the bell cow, maybe he can solidify himself and get back to what he looked like at the very end of last year, because he won some teams, some fantasy championships last year with how well he played.
Yep, fair enough. I made fun of Jeremy last week for the Matt Forte pick. The background, the logo of the show is two zombies, and I compared Matt Forte to one of those zombies. And I think I was proven correct in that regard. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump right into last week's picks. Be straight up and honest with you, folks. A lot of these picks didn't go well. I should point out to first-time viewers, the way these picks works, we're not picking the cream of the crop here. The show is called the Fantasy Football Apocalypse for a reason. We're not going to tell you to start Aaron Rodgers. We're not going to tell you to start Le'Veon Bell. You know to play those guys. We are here to find those beneath the radar, apocalyptic type players. So the way we do that is we only pick players who are owned in 50% or less of Yahoo leagues. Those totals are as of this morning. So with that in mind, let's look at last week's picks. Weren't the best picks. Starting off with Jeremy's quarterback. It was an ugly one. And actually, I want to hear what you have to think about this, because we made a bet about this pick. Jeremy picked Trevor Siemian. He was so confident in Mr. Siemian to back up his first 2 weeks that we bet a Chipotle burrito on whether or not he would have 12 points. He obviously did not reach that mark. So Jeremy now owes me a burrito from Chipotle.
Well, I mean, as you can see you'll find out a little bit later, Trevor Siemian is not my cup of tea when it comes to quarterbacks. He had, in Jeremy's defense, he had a very good first 2 games. I think he had like 20 and 18 points. So, I mean, there was reason to expect he'd play well, but I just don't think it worked. I mean, obviously he only had 7 points. So
yeah, I hated the pick. I thought it was a terrible matchup. I feel pretty strongly I was proven right. Admittedly, my quarterback didn't go great either, but it was still better than Jeremy's. I went with Jay Cutler. He put up 10 points. Now, 4 of those points came on a completely and utterly meaningless touchdown on the final play of the game. I'll take it. It wasn't pretty. Still better than Jeremy's. So moving on, running backs. Jeremy's top running back last week was Chris Carson of the Seattle Seahawks. Carson had a pretty big workload the week before in week 2. Wasn't as great this week, but does come up with a touchdown to save his fantasy relevance and has 12 points.
I mean, I actually like Chris Carson. If you would have told me before the week started I could have Chris Carson, he was under 50% owned, I would have been shocked. I mean, I think he's the guy going forward in Seattle. But, I mean, this performance obviously was not inspiring. We'll see if he can turn it around this week. I think he will be. I mean, his percentage ownership skyrocketed. Well, I mean, we'll see what happens going forward.
All right, speaking of guys whose percentage own skyrocketed, this is a guy Jeremy and I got into quite the argument about last week. Chris Thompson. I absolutely loved Thompson. Jeremy absolutely did not. Jeremy actually had the first pick of running backs last week, passed over Chris Thompson. I did not make that mistake, and he was arguably the best player on the field on Sunday night, racking up 188 total yards of offense and a touchdown against the Oakland Raiders for the Washington Redskins.
I mean, he looked good, man. I mean, going forward, I mean, I'll put you on the spot, Trent. Would you rather have Chris Thompson or someone like Mark Ingram? I mean, he's been killing it.
Well, it's interesting because his head coach last week, Jay Gruden, came out and said, we want to expand his role. Then he has a monster game on Sunday night, and then Gruden comes out yesterday and says, he's begging me for more touches, but he's not going to get them. Well, which one is it? Are you going to expand his role or are you not? Like, this guy has been absolutely fire for 3 straight weeks to start the game. Samaje Perine, Rob Kelly have not been great. I just don't understand the hesitance to not go full bore with Chris Thompson.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder if he's trying to preserve him for those passing down attacks and try to keep him healthy and keep him fresh. But, I mean, you got to see what you have, right? Perine and Kelly are not inspiring confidence.
All right, so this is where things really take a nosedive. Jeremy's next running back Matt Forte, who we were just talking about, a whopping 2 points, has 8 carries for 25 yards, doesn't even get targeted in the passing game. Just not great.
I mean, looking at the beginning of the week, I mean, you would have thought that he would have had more than 2 points. I can see the pick.
I wouldn't have, and I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm stuck with Jeremy's picks. It's not great, but it is what it is.
All right, so with that being said, my second running back, we just talked about him. Darren Sproles probably suffered a career-ending injury. It was early in the game, so he only got 1 point. So it kind of wasn't fair with that one. Not much else to say about that. So let's go ahead and move on to wide receivers. Jeremy's top wide receiver last week. I was actually expecting a much bigger game. Danny Amendola only scores 7 points. It was his first game back from a concussion. I think part of the problem was Brady was really working the ball down the field. He had like 3 40-plus yard touchdowns between Chris Hogan and Brandon Cooks. And that's just not Danny Amendola's game. Danny Amendola is the underneath type guy. Still an okay effort, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bitter about this. As you can see on my shirt, Texans fan. That was they were definitely taking shots down the field, and that was not Amendola. But yeah, I think he could be interesting going forward. I mean, Brady has historically liked those intermediate passes, and I just wonder if they're trying to keep Amendola fresh. And so I wonder like how much action he'll see on the field. That's my only concern, and obviously health.
For me personally, this will actually tie into what we were talking about earlier. So I am a Kelvin Benjamin owner in our league. I also own Danny Amendola. I pretty well have decided at this point I'm going to roll with Danny Amendola if Kelvin Benjamin does not play this week as expected. I think I'm going to lock in and roll with Danny Amendola, even though his performance wasn't quite what we expected last week.
Yeah, there's just so many mouths to feed there. You've got Gronk, you've got Hogan, you've got it's just
Brandon Cooks.
Oh, I know. I'm just saying, like they've got. I mean, obviously Cooks, but like there's so many smaller guys. Yeah. The running backs, Deion Lewis, James White. There's just a lot of mouths. Like you just never know. So yeah.
All right. So with that said, my first wide receiver last week was Jermaine Kearse. He was coming off 2 really big games. Really surprisingly took a back seat here in a game that the Jets actually not only won, but a game that the Jets dominated. But Kearse only has 3 catches for 42 yards. And those 3 catches were actually his only 3 targets of the game. Really surprising after he had been McCown's clear number 1 the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I like him, but you might be able to tell that a little bit later. No spoilers, but we'll see.
All right, next, Jeremy's second wide receiver, a complete and total goose egg from J.J. Nelson. No points. He was targeted 3 times. Does not catch any of them.
I mean, I could go ahead and bash Jeremy and say this is terrible, but I picked him up in 3 leagues, so I probably shouldn't do that. I literally don't know how he scores 0 points. Like, I feel like we've been trying to announce like the new number 1 receiver for like forever. I mean, we've been J.J. Nelson, Michael Floyd, John Brown. I until Fitz wants to give it up, I don't think it's going anywhere.
By the way, it seems that Jeremy is actually watching the live stream right now, so definitely want to say hello to Jeremy. But with that said, your pick was terrible with J.J. Nelson. My pick from his favorite team, Kenny Stills, has an okay game that was almost way bigger. Kenny Stills racks up 9 points, has 4 receptions for 51 yards, was targeted 10 times, though. The targets were there. He just didn't come up with the receptions. Could have been a huge day. Still was our best wide receiver pick of the week, though.
That's pretty poor if your top wide receiver pick is going to score 9 points. So
remember,
we'll see if we can improve.
Guys, though, so it's not all bad. Next up, Jeremy's tight end last week was Evan Ingram. Also scored 9 points. He had 4 receptions for what do we have here? 45 yards. Was targeted 7 times.
Yeah, I mean he's a nice player. I'm intrigued with him going forward. I actually saw a trade in one of my leagues. I think it might have been last week. I think this was our league where Evan Ingram went for Tyler Eifert, which was crazy.
Jeremy
I actually like the trade. I thought he had a good deal, but I admittedly am very down on Tyler Eifert. I mean, I don't like him very much. So,
well, with his injury history, it's really hard to get behind Tyler Eifert 100%. And then finally, the last pick from last week, my tight end, Charles Clay, had a very solid 15 points, scored a touchdown, caught all 6 of his targets, only at 39 yards. But let's face it, with Tyrod Taylor, you're not going to get a ton of vertical passing. So not surprising to see the yards per catch that low. But, hey, I will gladly take the touchdown. So let's go ahead and do a full side-by-side comparisons and show you the optimal lineup, combining mine and Jeremy's picks last week. So quarterback, we had Jay Cutler versus Trevor Siemian. Cutler's 10 points went out there. And there we go. Running back, we had Chris Thompson versus Matt Forte. Chris Thompson, 30 points, pick of the week. He wins there. At the second running back spot, we had Darren Sproles and Chris Carson. Carson, on the strength of the TD, gets 12 points, so he wins out there. Wide receivers, Kenny Stills, like we just talked. Oh, I guess we should say Jermaine Kearse and Danny Amendola actually tied. So either way, it's 7 points. After that, Kenny Stills with his 9 points over J.J. Nelson's goose egg was our top wide receiver. And then finally, tight ends, Charles Clay 15, Evan Ingram 9. And so you see our optimal lineup last week. Jay Cutler, Chris Thompson, Chris Carson, Danny Amendola, or Jermaine Kearse, Kenny Stills, and Charles Clay for a combined total of 83, which is down 7 points from last week when our optimal lineup scored 90 points. So some good diamonds in the rough there. Obviously, Chris Carson was the home run pick out of that, but Charles Clay is the guy whose ownership is still in the 20s. People really need to jump on Charles Clay, I think. But that is a story that we will be getting into more later on, as it is time now to dive into this week's picks. And again, just remember, these are players 50% or less of Yahoo leagues. Aaron, who is your quarterback?
All right, so it is my boy, Deshaun Watson. The dude, so with quarterbacks, if you can't get one of the top 4 or 5 guys, Brady, Rodgers, Breeze, I'm going to go with a quarterback that's going to get something on the ground. It's like rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. Deshaun's going to do that. Deshaun averaged 19.3 points so far. Wilson scored 32 points last week against the Titans. I think that since Deshaun's been the starter, I think he's going to be really good going forward. So I feel very confident in this pick.
Yeah, I actually like Deshaun Watson a lot also. He's probably not going to be a week-to-week fantasy guy this year. I think that's a little too optimistic, but I definitely think he's a guy that you can look at for sure in 2 quarterback leagues, but also as a possible streamer. I think as he gets more experience, he's going to become even more dangerous. Like you said, he has the ability to run, and he made some really good-looking throws, and he almost beat Tom Brady last week, but he did not.
Yeah, just rub it in one more time, why don't you?
Gladly. That Brady magic in that last drive. But anyway, another guy that runs the ball a lot. How about Tyrod Taylor of the Buffalo Bills? How about this? 2 out of the first 3 weeks, Tyrod Taylor has scored 17 points. That you'll take that from Aaron Rodgers, you'll take 17 points. From Tyrod Taylor, that is an absolute steal. This is a guy who could easily run for 20 or 30 yards in a game and also have a rushing touchdown. They are playing the Atlanta Falcons this week. There's a chance they get blown out, which means he could have 35 passing attempts, which means he has a chance to get the 300 yards passing this week also. This is a great spot, in my opinion, to play Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah, so I need to get back on board with him. Like preseason, I really liked him. Then the Sammy Watkins trade happened, and I started to not like him as much. The reason being, Tyrod Taylor is a guy that throws deep. That's Sammy Watkins. When you take away him, they've got so many mid-range guys. Like Zay Jones is going to catch passes low, but I do like the rushing. I think that gives you a high floor. So I like the pick, but I just need to get back on board with them. I was just so down after that Sammy Watkins trade.
Yeah, it's funny because their top 2 wide receivers last year, Sammy Watkins and Robert Woods, are now the top 2 wide receivers for Jared Goff in LA. It's just funny how that worked out.
Killing it.
Yeah, who saw that coming? That's a guy that may become a borderline player that we pick on the show if he continues to have weeks like he has 2 out of the first 3 weeks.
Yeah,
let's go ahead.
Not.
Let's go ahead. Let's move on to running backs. Aaron, who is your top running back pick this week?
My top running back pick was Wendell Smallwood. So this is something that I think we already talked about, the Darren Sproles injury. I think he's going to see an uptick in touches after that. I mean, he already got the same number of touches as Blount last week. They were each at 12. So Smallwood's the most likely guy that's going to fill in for the Darren Sproles role. So that's going to be more passes, potentially even more rushes. I think that, and if you've kind of noticed, if you look at Yahoo, he's one of the most added players. So I think that ownership percentage is about to skyrocket. So I think I'm getting in on the front end of that, and I'm hoping for a big week.
So for those for those of you that have watched week to week, you might remember I actually picked Wendell Smallwood way back in week 1 because I said I don't think LeGarrette Blount is that good. And at the time I said this might not work out great for week 1, which by the way it didn't. He had 1 point at the time. But I did say I think he's a guy that has some added value in a season-long league. Now I didn't see it necessarily coming by way of a Darren Sproles injury, but here we are just 3 weeks later, and that time has come. He's clearly a guy that has legitimate fantasy value going forward. LeGarrette Blount is just not that good. He's had 2 good years in the NFL. They were both as a part of the New England Patriots. That is not a coincidence. The guy that ran for 18 touchdowns last year is not legitimately who LeGarrette Blount is. As a result, I think Wendell Smallwood is a guy that's going to see 12, 15, maybe even 20 touches a week going forward. So I really like Smallwood.
Yeah, one other small piece on that. You would think that the Chargers doesn't seem like the optimal matchup, but the last 3 weeks, C.J. Anderson rushed for 81 yards, Ajayi was 122, and Kareem Hunt went for 172. So the matchup does give him some chances to rush for some yards.
Okay, so moving on, my top running back this week. Now, unfortunately, Chris Thompson, the new love of my life, he is gone. He's skyrocketed. He's well over 70% owned now. He cannot be picked. So I'm going back to the well. I'm going to one of my first loves, a UT product, Jamal Charles. He has quietly been averaging over 5 yards a carry this year. He is, in fact, the NFL record holder for highest yards per carry in a career. I don't know if you even realize that. No one has ever averaged as many yards per carry as Jamal Charles has. When he's healthy, he is a dangerous player. He had 9 carries for 56 yards last week, scored a touchdown, and is basically already in 3 weeks gone from a total backup to an even timeshare with C.J. Anderson. And his arrow is definitely pointed in the right direction, in my opinion.
I mean, preseason, I wondered if he was even the number 3 guy with Devontae Booker, but he's gone. He's number 2. I have C.J. Anderson in a league, and I'm trying to move him as fast as I can. I mean, I'm worried that Charles is going to be in a complete timeshare if he's not already there. And then I can see at the end of the year him being the number 1 guy. I mean, they're never going to give him a full 20 carries with his injury history, but I don't think Jamal Charles needs that. And in his prime, when he was killing it, he didn't even need that many carries. So I think he's got some nice upside.
All right, so let's move on. Aaron, who is going to be your next running back?
All right, so my next running back I'm excited about, Mike Tolbert. You'd probably be like, why would you pick Tolbert? Shady McCoy is in Buffalo. So did you know last week he only had 3 less touches than McCoy? If I can get a guy that is the goal line threat, that a team that wants to run the ball, and he's getting 12 carries, I'm going to take that, especially with how thin running backs are. I mean, if I can get a guy with 12 carries and a goal line threat, I don't see what's not to like.
Well, I see a lot not to like. Mike Tolbert is a big boy. Let's face it, the guy had 1 really good year in Carolina. Even then, he was completely touchdown dependent. I know Sean McCoy had a terrible game last week. Mike Tolbert actually outrushed him. Not only did he only have 3 less carries, he actually had more yards. I just don't expect that to be a realistic scenario going forward. I think Shady just had a bad game. The coaches realized he was struggling, and they put Tolbert out there. Tolbert did okay. I can't imagine Mike Tolbert actually getting 11 carries again. I just don't see it.
We'll see. I mean, they preseason loved Mike Tolbert. For whatever reason, I have no idea, but they loved Mike Tolbert, and they gave him carries, so we'll see.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. My next running back pick, this is a pretty big gamble. I took one UT running back. Why not make it a pair? Let's go with Deonta Foreman. I'm really curious your opinions about Foreman as a Houston Texan fan, Aaron. Now, he only had 8 carries for 25 yards, but more importantly, he had 2 receptions for 65 yards last week. We saw it all last year at Texas where Deonta Foreman led the entire NCAA Division I in rushing yards last year. He's a guy that breaks off big chunk yardage. His touches have gone up. He's been in double digits each of the last 2 weeks. Lamar Miller has had chance after chance after chance to become a top-tier running back. It just hasn't happened. And I think we're moving closer to a point where Deonta Foreman, I wouldn't be surprised if he is the outright starter by like week 6 or 7. I think this is a guy whose arrow is pointed in the right direction.
All right, so here's my thoughts on Foreman. Season long, if you're looking at the later in the year, I think he's going to be great. I don't know that it's this week. So those passing yards, I watched the whole game. They're kind of a fluke. He's not their pass catcher. In this instance, it was a broken play. He was literally wide open, and there was just a broken play. That's the one where Deshaun Watson dodged like 3 Patriots defenders and threw the ball, and he caught it. I don't see the passing yards. He is by far the Texans' best running back to the tackles, but I for some reason, I'm just not sold on him yet. And I think there's going to be a lot of passing in this game against the Titans, a.k.a. the Deshaun Watson pick.
Well, we will certainly see how that one plays out. So we are definitely kind of going head-to-head on that one. So let's move on now to wide receivers. Aaron, who will be your top wide receiver pick this week?
All right, so I am going with Allen Hurns. I was at church on Sunday, and I looked at my phone, and I saw, how the heck did the Jags just blast the Ravens? I had no idea how that happened. I'm actually pretty optimistic. Blake Bortles seems to be turning a corner. Ever since Allen Robinson went down, Allen Hurns has been averaging, I think it's at least 16 points a game. I mean, he's been consistent. He's had a breakout year before, and he's got the opportunity. I'm excited about it. We'll see what happens.
Yes, he has definitely had 2 good games in a row. There's no denying that. It's just really hard to get optimistic about a guy that has to rely on Blake Bortles throwing him the ball. I highly doubt the guy that threw 4 touchdowns last week in London we ever see again the rest of the season. I actually heard an interesting stat that Blake Bortles is 3-0 in London games. For whatever reason, he really enjoys going over there. Sure, the points have been there. It's just really hard for me to get enthusiastic about a guy that has Blake Bortles throwing him the ball.
I mean, who else is going to take those besides Lee? I mean, Mercedes Lewis, yeah, but is he really going to catch 3 touchdowns ever again in his lifetime? I mean, I don't love Allen Hurns. He's okay, but for some reason, Bortles trusts him. And if the points are there, I'm not going to argue with what's going to happen there.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We will see how that one plays out. So let's move on. My top wide receiver pick of the week. This is a guy that I absolutely love. Sterling Shepard. How do these numbers sound, Aaron? 7 receptions, 133 yards, a touchdown off of 10 targets. That is what Sterling Shepard did last week against the Philadelphia Eagles. Yes, Eli Manning is on the back end of his career. He is still probably a top 12 to top 15 quarterback, able to get the job done. Shepard also had 8 targets week 1, by the way. This is a guy that Manning likes throwing the ball to. So I think there's a ton of value to be found with Sterling Shepard.
Yeah, I think we forgot about Shepard with that Brandon Marshall acquisition. Everybody's like, oh, Marshall's the guy. I don't think Brandon Marshall's the guy. Safe to call him a bust yet? I mean, it might be. I like Shepard. I wanted him, but you got him first. I think he could be a really good player, not just this week, but going forward. He's a high pass catching guy. He gets a lot of targets. I could see him if you're in a PPR league, which I think most are now. He could be a guy that you put in your flex going forward.
By the way, they are also playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so there is some shootout potential in that game. Just as another side note. Let's move on. Your second wide receiver pick, Aaron.
All right, so I'm going with Jermaine Kearse. I have to admit, I wasn't excited about him when he got traded. He just seemed like a journeyman. I didn't think there was going to be much, but as you can probably tell us on my previous picks, I don't argue with guys that have already put up points. So after week 2, he was a top 5 wideout. He's still a wide receiver 2 based on what's happened first 3 weeks. I think he's averaged like 13.6 points per game. If you saw the wideouts from last week, that would be the number 1 wideout out there. So I think that he's their number 1 option. He's had the most catches, the most touchdowns. It's a bad team, but someone's got to catch passes. So I like Jermaine Kearse.
Yeah, I'm not going to get too crazy about what happened last week. I think it was just one of those deals where he had a bad game. I still am a pretty firm believer in Jermaine Kearse going forward. I think he's a guy that's going to be I don't know if he's going to quite rank the wide receiver 2 ranks, but I think he's going to be a legitimate flex option moving forward for the rest of the season. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on to my second wide receiver. And this is a guy, we talked about the Kelvin Benjamin injury. Basically his replacement, Devin Funchess of the Carolina Panthers. Last week had 4 receptions for 58 yards. Not super great numbers, but again, the targets are what you want to care about. 10 targets. He's going to be Cam Newton's number 1 receiver going forward. Admittedly, Cam hasn't looked great. Well, going all the way back to last year, Cam hasn't looked great. But let's not forget this is a guy that was the MVP of the league in 2015. At some point, he's going to get this figured out. And just based on volume alone, Devin Funchess is a guy you're just going to have to look at. So that is why I'm picking Funchess.
So as a Cam Newton owner, very down on everything Carolina right now. I mean, they have to figure it out. He has to throw to someone. I admittedly do not like Devin Funchess, though. I just don't think he's a very good player. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I'm not a big fan of him, and I'm not a big fan of Cam Newton right now. He just looks lost. I'm assuming he figures it out, but I almost want to stay away from that whole passing attack until I can see more evidence of them actually being able to put something together.
How about I give you one more reason you should look at Devin Funchess this week?
Oh, all right, I'll play.
They're playing the New England Patriots. There's a strong possibility they are getting blown out in this game, and Cam Newton's going to have to throw the ball 40 to 45 times. So, again, those targets got to come somewhere. So Devin Funchess, even if he's not a great player, could just walk his way into 8 or 9 receptions in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it. I just, for some reason, I don't like him.
All right. Well, who do you like at tight end?
All right, so I'm going with Jeremy's pick from last week, Evan Ingram. So I like the Giants' passing attack. The reason being, their running game is awful. Paul Perkins, terrible. I don't understand how he's so bad. Like, I saw a stat. I think it was 88% of the time at first contact, he went straight to the ground. So I don't think they're running it, and so I think that there's a lot of room for passing in New York. I thought he was a guy that might take a little bit longer to develop, so I think he's going to continue getting better as the season goes on. But he's already shown that he's been pretty good, and he'll put up points. So I think one of these weeks he's just going to have a breakout game, hoping it's this week.
Yeah, Jeremy and I talked about this last week. I agree with pretty much everything he said. I think especially in terms of the future, Evan Ingram's a guy that's got a lot of value. He was a first-round pick of the Giants in the NFL draft back in April. This is a guy that they clearly like. And so far through the first 3 weeks, there's really been nothing to change that opinion to the negative. If anything, you have to feel more solidly that this is a pretty good football player moving forward. All right. I guess you don't got anything else to add about Evan Ingram. So let's move on to my tight end. Let's just run it all the way back. I'm going to go with my tight end from last week again, Charles Clay. I picked his quarterback, so I'm going to pick him too. He had a touchdown last week. I don't see any reason why he can't do it again this week. Again, we're playing the Falcons. There's a chance they get behind early and get behind big. The pass attempts are going to be there. And Charles Clay is essentially the security blanket for Tyrod Taylor. So worked out so well last week. Let's just do it again.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good player. I think he's just going to be one of those guys that's kind of inconsistent going forward. So you never know if you're going to get the 5-point game you saw, if you're going to get a 15-point game. I mean, I really don't know that he's got a lot of talent, but there's a lot of opportunity because there's not a lot of receivers out there, and I think they're going to be throwing it some as well. So kind of the same situation as Carolina. Got to throw to someone. Why not Charles Clay?
All right, so there you have it. Those are our picks for this week. Once again, Jeremy will be back next week. Want to definitely say thank you to Aaron. And in fact, this is a great idea that Aaron had. We want to invite you to play along this week. You go through, make your own selections, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a tight end. You pick your 6 players. If you beat both of us, we'll give you a shout out on the show next week. How about that? You can tweet your selections to me at the Trent Scott. You can tweet them to Aaron at AG Reike. You can comment on the show. You can send me a message. Just let us know. Who do you like? If you beat me, we'll give you a shout out.
Yeah, sounds good. Just so the spelling, it's Reike does not sound like how it's spelled. AGRIEKE.
Yes,
yeah.
Actually, our producer was trying to find you on Skype before the show, and he was typing it REI. I was like, no, I before E. Where were you in elementary school? It's I before E. But obviously, we found you. It all worked out. So this is the point of the show where I normally ask Jeremy if he has any words of wisdom going forward. So do you have any thoughts in general, any advice that you can give our listeners, Aaron?
Stay away from those Cardinals wideouts that they say are going to be the next big thing. They might just get you 0 points.
All right. So with that said, that is going to wrap up our show for this week. Once again, Jeremy will be back next week. And thank you to our producer, Brad. And we are out of here.
Thanks.